As as Biden was sworn in yesterday, a lot of people watched with belief and disbelief. The moment Joe Biden raised his hand to be sworn in as the 46th president of the United States yesterday, it was one that many Americans had long struggled to imagine. For 4 years, Democrats had fretted that voters would side with Pumpkin Tits or that he'd find a way to stay in the White House, but many Republicans couldn't believe that Pumpkin Tits would lose anyway. So when the inauguration actually happened Wednesday, a lot of Biden supporters had said that they found themselves overcome by emotion and a wave of relief, but for many it was coupled with anxiety that the United States is too broken and too divided for one president to repair. Alice Boyer, a 24-year-old Democrat organizer and legislative staffer in Montana, who's she's she's part Native American, but she's part of the Blackfeet tribe. She felt a rush of optimism with Biden. She said there would soon be a coordinated federal response to the coronavirus pandemic. But she also was worried that Americans seemed too eager to move on rather than address the issues that allowed Pumpkin to take office in the first place. It feels like a giant weight has been lifted, said Boyer, who became especially emotional as Kamala Harris became vice president. And shattering race and gender barriers, one speech won't fix things, but it does open doors for later on. Meanwhile, Connie McGill, a 64-year-old pumpkin tit nutlooker and retired author of pet cookbooks, had listened to Biden's remarks and discussed them with her so-called friends over text messages. While she appreciated his calls for unity, but they did little to alleviate her fear that this moment marked the start of the country's descent into communism, which it won't be. She still believes that voter fraud happened, which it didn't, and she says, and I feel like we've been pushed into this, but she says, but I did hear him out. Um, said McGill, who's a grandmother of 12 who lives in Tulsa. I would love if my opinion would change, but it's not going to change over words, it's going to change over actions. Wednesday's inauguration was unlike any before, coming at one of the most tumultuous moments in U.S. history. Biden was surrounded by just a few guests and looked out at an audience of American flags that were guarded by American troops, or by the armed troops anyway. Americans tuned in largely from the isolation of their homes and away from the threat of the pandemic surveillance. Those tensions weighed heavily on many of those who watched. This is probably the most important presidency in my lifetime, said Joe Johnson, who's 58, and a retired Air Force veteran and gym owner in Nashville, who's physically a conservative and considers himself a political independent. He says, I am breathing a major sigh of relief. It feels like we've been in a foxhole under siege and running out of supplies, and in the 11th hour, reinforcements have shown up. That's the way I feel. I feel like the cavalry came. Johnson watched the day's events out of the corner of his eye as he led a boot camp style exercise class via Zoom. He wasn't the only one. When Harris was sworn in, and two of his clients, both Asian American women, burst into cheers and applause. He smiled along with them, and then basically, jokingly told them to get back to work. As he later listened to Biden's words, he was struck when he listened to Biden's words. He was struck by how starkly different they were from what he had been hearing from Pumpkin Tits. Pumpkin Tits had never seemed to care about the 400,000 people that were killed by COVID-19 under his leadership. This is what Johnson had said. His cousin, who died alone in New York, um, but Biden made the nation's loss for a focus of his inauguration. Pumpkin Tits had refused to acknowledge the existence of the systemic racism that Johnson said, but Biden admitted that we have that. As a black person, you're often accused of pulling the race card. It's easy to feel crazy, like the inequalities you feel, um, or the inequities, sorry, you feel or experience just in your head, said Johnson, who has 4 children and 5 grandchildren. Finally, the President of the United States is up there admitting that there is a systemic racism in this country, and that is fucking huge. But will it change anything? That's what Ebony Price, 29, wondered as she had sat on a friend's front porch in rural Texas and watched the inauguration on her laptop. After voting for Obama in 2012, she sat out the 2016 election and then wrote into dumbass Kanye for president in November because he's a happy medium. No, he's not. She is relieved that Pumpkin Tits no longer has access to nuclear weapons, but she worries that the violence seen at the U.S. Capitol will only continue and worsen in the weeks ahead because the Pumpkin Tit sycophants are numerous and unlikely to change their outlook. Their mind is pretty much made up, said Price, who lives in Houston and is studying to be a veterinarian. They hate Biden they hate Biden just as much as they love pumpkin tits. That's definitely the case for a guy named Guardiola, a dedicated pumpkin tit nutlooker in South Florida, who regularly organizes Klan rallies in support of pumpkin tits and refuses to recognize that Biden won. As Biden was sworn in, um, Guardiola and hundreds of fellow pumpkin tit nutlookers were standing along the southern border in West Palm Beach, having just welcomed the outgoing squatter home. Instead of racing past as it typically does, the motorcade moved at a glacial speed so that Pumpkin Tits could fuck over his onlookers. You could just see the smile on his face, waving at us. Yeah, pathetic. Said Guardiola, 63, a Cuban-American retired NCAA basketball referee who lives in Palm Beach Gardens with his 3 cats. For months, Guardiola waited for the Invisible Ferryman to intervene so that Pumpkin Tits could have a second term. He thought it would happen before the election, perhaps in the indictment of several federal employees whom he considers part of the deep state. He then thought it would happen soon after Biden was declared the winner of the election, perhaps with a dump of evidence that proved Democrats had rigged the election, which they didn't. He thought for sure that it would happen before the Electoral College voted, and before Congress should have read those votes, and long before Biden raised his right hand. He grew frustrated as time passed and turned his pastor for guidance. Um, he told himself over and over again that the Invisible Ferryman's got this. Guardiola had put off making plans for Wednesday, which he called the bogus inauguration that may never take place, but it did. But then Pumpkin Tits announced that he would travel to Mar-a-Lago, and Guardiola made plans to greet him once again. He held out hope that divine interventions take place this Wednesday, and that Joe Biden would never put his left hand on the ever sacred Holy Bible, which that happened yesterday. He did. Um, Guardiola had refused to watch the ceremony and said that he planned to keep his television off for the next few days so he doesn't hear Biden's speech to the nation. Basically, he insisted that Biden isn't his president and that he's just going to ignore everything. Um, 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 Guardiola's worries about a Biden presidency are vague but severe, and it involves the country ceasing to exist as it has a socialism or communism takeover. Even though Biden has made it clear that is not his plan. Some Biden supporters were equally vague in their hopes for the next 4 years, just wanting anything but pumpkin tits. But there are concrete promises that Biden has made or suggested that could quickly change the lives of many, including undocumented immigrants, the unemployed, those with health insurance, and those who can't afford college, and anyone who wants the pandemic finally to end. Tanderup, a 68-year-old retired teacher and moderate Democrat who lives on a farm in rural Nebraska, has spent the past decade fighting the construction of the Keystone Pipeline through his farmland and close to his family's water well. President Barack Obama had rejected the project back in 2015, but Pumpkin Tits revived and advanced it through executive orders and permit approvals. But on Wednesday, Biden signed an executive order to rescind the presidential permit that Pumpkin Tits granted the Keystone Pipeline. Today will be the culmination of all that effort, said Tanderup, who plans to continue to advocate for environmental issues. Today is a wonderful day, but it's kind of a tough day because we didn't know when this day would come. As Jennifer Lopez sang her version of the Woody Guthrie's This Land Is Your Land, a protest song that embraced my landowners and Native Americans, the Native American activists who fought the pipeline, Tanderup became emotional and tears came to his eyes as Biden spoke. It was just such a contrast to what we've had the last 4 years, he said. I was just so overjoyed that we have a president again, and we have a president who cares about this country more than he cares about himself. Biden's remarks Wednesday struck a somber tone, but Wednesday was still a celebration for those that are happy to see that Pumpkin Tits is gone and to see a woman of color become the first vice president. Um, Natasha, Natasha Witherspoon, a 49-year-old marketing consultant in Charlotte, put on a string of pearls and a pair of pink Chuck Taylors in honor of her as a fellow member of the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, and opened a bottle of champagne, basically pink color. Um, her cell phone pinged again and again with texts from sorority sisters and friends. And she's like, I'm taking pics like I'm there. One wrote. Another added, tears, so proud, so happy. A lifelong Democrat, Witherspoon often felt dismay and disbelief during the past 4 years. Never in my life did I imagine the things that we witnessed take place in the Pumpkinhead administration, she said. She said that as a black woman, she's not naive about racism, but I've never thought I'd see white supremacy on full display. And you hear people say that this isn't America. Yes, it is. But she'd grown more hopeful since the day the election was called for Biden. When she telephoned her parents and screamed into the phone, "We did it!" She seized the opportunity on Wednesday to celebrate this moment that she worried would never come. She says, "I feel." She said she felt blessed to be in this moment and savoring every minute of it. So, like I said, some people were happy, some people weren't, but I was happy that Biden won. Even I, even though I only voted for him to get Trump out of office. But yeah.